Before we dive into today's terrifying tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a spine-chilling story. Let's get into it. The mystery of the frozen lake.
I came to this small, icy town in Alaska for peace. After all I'd been through, I thought isolation would be comforting. The endless snow, the quiet nights, the distance from everything, it felt like a retreat, a chance to recover, to be alone. The lake sits just beyond my cabin. It's huge, frozen solid from early November, and under the moonlight, it stretches like an endless white desert, undisturbed. In the evenings, I'd make tea, wrap myself in a heavy blanket, and sit by the window, staring out at that lake. There was something so tranquil about it. Until last week. It was around midnight. I was sitting by the window, gazing out at the lake as usual, letting the silence wash over me. But as my eyes drifted across the frozen landscape, I noticed figures. People, or what looked like people, standing on the lake. They were far off, barely visible in the dim light, but I could make out their shapes, dark against the snow. They weren't moving, just standing there. I squinted, rubbed my eyes, but they didn't disappear. I watched them for a few minutes, my heartbeat picking up, trying to tell myself that they were just an illusion. A trick of the light, maybe. But something felt wrong. They were too real, too solid. I shut the curtains and forced myself to go to bed, convincing myself it was nothing. Maybe shadows from trees, I told myself. Just the isolation getting to me. But the next night, they were there again. And the night after that. Always at the same time, and always in the same spot, as if waiting. Tonight, I forced myself to watch for longer, to really focus. I thought, maybe if I got a good look, I could figure out what was happening. I tried to make out faces or clothes, anything that might make sense, but it was no use. They were just figures. And then, as I was about to turn away, I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper. A sound so soft it felt like it came from inside my own head. But it was outside, coming from the lake. I froze, straining to listen, and then it came again, a little louder this time, like a distant call. Like someone calling for help. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding, feeling an unnatural cold wash over me. It was just the wind, I told myself, 100 times over. But in the silence of my cabin, I could still hear that faint voice, calling me back to the lake. I couldn't sleep last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see those figures on the lake. Their shapes seared into my mind, their presence lingering like a shadow that wouldn't go away. By morning, I was exhausted but restless, the need to understand clawing at me. The sun barely rose here in December, casting only a dim light that made everything seem unreal. But today, I decided I'd go down to the lake, just to prove to myself that nothing was there. Or maybe, to find out if there was. When I stepped outside, the cold felt sharper, biting at my skin like needles. My boots crunched over the snow as I made my way down to the edge of the lake, heart pounding against my ribs. I kept telling myself it was silly, just paranoia, but that didn't stop my stomach from twisting as I got closer. The ice stretched out before me, white and empty. No figures in sight, no strange sounds, just the stillness of winter. I felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe it had just been my imagination, a trick of light and shadow. I was about to turn back when I noticed something strange. Right there, in the middle of the ice, were marks. Deep impressions, stamped into the ice as though someone had walked across it. I took a few steps forward, feeling the crunch of the thin snow on top. The tracks were huge, larger than any boot print I'd ever seen, and distorted somehow, like whatever had left them was heavy. I crouched down, running a gloved hand along one of the marks. The surface felt odd, almost like it was warmer where the prints were. I shivered, glancing around as an unsettling feeling crept up my spine. My breath misted in front of me, but I could swear, just for a moment, that the ice beneath my fingers pulsed, like it was alive. That's when I heard it, the same faint whisper from last night. But this time, it wasn't a single voice. It was multiple, overlapping in a soft, desperate chorus. Words I couldn't understand, sounds so faint I could almost believe I was imagining it. But the voices grew louder, mingling with the wind, whispering from beneath the ice as if something, or someone, was trapped down there. I stumbled back, slipping on the frozen surface, heart racing as I scanned the lake. The voices faded, leaving only the echo of my own breathing. But even in the silence, I felt it, a presence, something ancient and cold, waiting just beneath my feet. I didn't need to stay any longer. I turned and walked back toward the cabin, my eyes darting back and forth, feeling exposed even though no one else was around. As I reached the shore, I heard my name, clear as day, as if someone were standing right behind me. I whipped around, but the lake was empty. Still, the words lingered in the air. A soft, pleading call, my name repeated in a voice that seemed to come from the ice itself. I hurried back to my cabin, locking the door behind me, as if that would keep whatever was out there away. But even now, sitting here, I can still feel that presence. And every time I close my eyes, I see those prints on the ice and hear those whispers, calling to me, begging for something I'm too afraid to give. I thought I'd be able to brush it off, to forget the voices, the strange marks on the ice. Maybe write it off as sleep deprivation, isolation, anything that sounded reasonable. But in my gut, I knew that wasn't true. Something was wrong with that lake, something old and cold that didn't belong, and it was getting harder to ignore. That night, sleep felt impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear whispers, that same soft, pleading call that came from the lake. It was as if it was seeping through the walls of my cabin, as if the very air was whispering my name. I could swear I felt the ice-cold presence even in my own bed. Eventually, I gave up on sleep and decided to stay up, watching the lake from my window, trying to make sense of it. Around midnight, the figures returned. I saw them, just as before, dark shapes scattered across the ice, standing so still they seemed frozen in time. But there were more of them now, at least a dozen, maybe more. And this time, they weren't alone. Something was moving between them. It was hard to see in the dark, but there was definitely something crawling across the ice, darting between the still figures. I could barely make out its shape, but it moved in quick, jerking motions, almost like an animal, but not quite. The figures on the lake didn't react. They just stood there, like statues, as this thing slithered and crawled around them. My heart raced as I watched, every instinct in me screaming to close the curtains, to look away, to forget I ever saw this. But I couldn't tear my eyes away. And then, it turned toward me. For one long, agonizing second, I felt it watching me. Its gaze, or whatever it had, fixed on me, even from that distance. A chill crawled up my spine, like icy fingers tracing along my bones. I felt it in my core, a cold, gnawing emptiness that rooted me to the spot. I couldn't look away, couldn't even move, as though I were under a spell. Then, as quickly as it had turned to me, it turned back to the figures. I let out a shaky breath, my whole body tense, as the thing moved once more across the ice, fading into the shadows. And as it disappeared, I realized the figures were turning too, all of them shifting slightly as if watching it leave. Or maybe as if watching me. I stumbled back from the window, breathing heavily, heart pounding. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but I was too scared to make a sound, too afraid to draw any attention. The silence outside was crushing, pressing against my cabin, leaving me feeling small and vulnerable, like a prey animal that knew it was being watched. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat by the window, too afraid to close my eyes, too terrified to look outside again. And when dawn finally broke, I had made up my mind. I was going to leave. By dawn, I was packed. It didn't take much. I hadn't brought much with me to this cabin, just a few essentials, hoping to spend the winter in isolation, far from everyone and everything. But this wasn't solitude. It was something much darker, and I knew that if I didn't leave, I might not get the chance again. The morning light was weak, barely illuminating the snowy landscape, and the shadows clung to the corners of the cabin like they belonged there. I avoided looking at the lake as I loaded my car, my heart racing with every step. A part of me expected to see the figures out there in the daylight, waiting, watching. But the ice lay still, empty, just as it had the day before. It was almost too quiet, as if the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a move. I climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key, and let out a breath of relief as the engine roared to life. The cabin disappeared in my rearview mirror, and the sense of freedom flooded over me. Finally, I thought, I was getting away from whatever was lurking in that lake. The road was slick with ice, winding through the dense, snow-covered trees. I drove carefully, trying to push the night's horrors out of my mind. But as I rounded a curve, something caught my eye in the mirror, a glint of light on the frozen lake, like a flicker of movement. I shook my head, refusing to look back. I needed to keep my focus forward, to get as far from that place as I could. But then, the voices started. At first, they were soft, barely audible over the hum of the engine. A whisper, a gentle pleading, drifting into the car like a faint radio signal. My grip tightened on the wheel, and I turned up the radio, hoping to drown it out. But the voices grew louder, a soft, insistent chorus, calling my name, pleading in a tone that made my skin crawl. It was impossible, I told myself. I'd left the lake behind. I was miles away. But the voices followed, louder now, filling the car until they drowned out every other sound. I pressed harder on the gas, my breath coming fast, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel, desperate to outrun whatever was haunting me. Then, the car shuddered and skidded, the tires screeching against the ice. I fought to keep control, but the steering wheel locked, jerking to the right. I screamed as the car spun out, hurtling off the road, crashing through the snowbanks until it finally came to a stop. When I opened my eyes, I was back, staring out at the lake. The cabin stood a few yards away, looking as if I'd never left. My heart dropped as I realized the car had somehow brought me full circle, back to the very place I was trying to escape. The voices had stopped, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. The lake lay just as still, the snow untouched. But I felt it, that dreadful presence, watching me from the shadows, waiting for me to come closer. I stepped out of the car, my legs trembling as I stared at the lake. I didn't want to go back, but something was drawing me forward, some invisible force pulling me toward the frozen water. It felt like a trance, like I was being controlled, my feet moving of their own accord as I stumbled down toward the ice. And then I saw them. The figures. They were back, scattered across the lake like before. But this time, they were closer, standing just a few yards from the shore, their dark shapes clearer in the daylight. I could almost make out faces, expressions frozen in silent agony. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but look. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring as the figures slowly raised their arms, reaching out to me, their faces twisted in expressions of horror, as though they were pleading for release. The last thing I heard before the world went dark was my own voice echoing back from the ice, calling out for help in a voice I didn't recognize. I don't know how long I lay there in the snow, half-conscious, listening to the eerie silence that had replaced the voices. My body felt numb, as if the cold had seeped into my bones. When I finally opened my eyes, I realized I was lying at the edge of the lake, my face inches from the frozen surface. I could feel the chill radiating up from the ice, pressing against my skin. And then I saw them. The figures were no longer out on the lake. They were beneath it. Shapes, faces pressed up against the ice, staring up at me with hollow eyes that seemed to reach into my soul. Mouths open in silent screams, hands clawing against the underside of the frozen surface as if trying to break free. It was as if the lake itself had swallowed them, trapping them in a prison of ice. I stumbled back, heart racing, but something stopped me. A reflection caught my eye, right there on the lake's surface. It was my own face. But something was wrong. My eyes looked hollow, empty, just like theirs. And my mouth was moving, forming words I couldn't hear. Panicked, I turned away, only to hear a voice whisper behind me, close, like a breath against my ear. "Come back." I froze, blood turning to ice in my veins. Slowly, I turned to look back at the lake, and what I saw made my heart plummet. One of the figures was rising from beneath the ice. It pressed its hand up against the frozen surface, and to my horror, I saw that its hand was identical to mine. Slowly, it lifted its head, and I came face to face with myself. My own reflection stared back at me, trapped under the ice, a twisted version of myself with eyes that seemed dead, hollow, as if all warmth, all life had drained away. And then it smiled, a cold, empty smile that didn't belong to me. It pressed its hand to the ice, beckoning, as though inviting me to join it. I backed away, heart pounding, but every step I took, the figure beneath the ice mirrored. I felt the pull again, that same force drawing me closer, whispering promises I didn't want to hear. And then, in a single horrifying moment, I understood. I wasn't meant to leave. All those people I'd seen on the lake, the figures haunting the ice, they were the ones who'd come before me. Each one had been drawn here, like me, and each had become trapped, frozen in time, a shadow beneath the surface. My mind reeled, desperate to escape, but my body felt heavy, as if the ice itself was pulling me down. I tried to scream, to move, but my limbs wouldn't respond. The last thing I saw before the darkness overtook me was my own face, staring back from beneath the ice, eyes wide and empty.
The Ghost Phone Booth.
The wind howled through the trees, carrying an unsettling chill that crept under my skin as I walked home from my friend's house. Cedar Hollow was a small, isolated village, a place where whispers of the supernatural blended with the rustling leaves. As night descended, the streetlights flickered uncertainly, casting long shadows that danced ominously along the road. I had lived here my entire life, but there was an unease that had settled over the town lately. People were growing more wary of the dark, more hesitant to venture out after sunset. It was just a few days ago when old Mrs. Henderson claimed she'd heard a voice calling her name from the woods. Naturally, the townsfolk dismissed her story, attributing it to the effects of age and solitude. But something in my gut told me there was more to it. As I approached the old, abandoned phone booth on the corner of Maple Street, I felt a strange pull toward it. The booth had been there for as long as I could remember, a relic from a time when landlines were the only way to communicate. It was a rotting structure now, the glass panels cracked and dirty, the paint peeling like old skin. The locals had long since forgotten about it, yet tonight, it seemed to emanate an eerie energy. I stopped in front of the booth, my heart pounding in my chest. It was then that I heard it, a soft ringing sound that sliced through the silence of the night. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of the mind in the stillness. But there it was again, a persistent, insistent ring that beckoned me closer. Curiosity mixed with trepidation as I reached out and grabbed the handle of the booth door. It creaked ominously as I pulled it open, and the sound of the phone ringing grew louder, reverberating in the empty space. I hesitated, looking over my shoulder to ensure I was alone. The street was deserted, and the shadows seemed to deepen, swallowing any lingering light. With a shaky breath, I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, the air thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The phone sat on the hook, its cord frayed and tangled, but the ringing persisted, urging me to pick it up. I felt a chill dance down my spine, a warning that I was crossing a line I might not be able to return from. I took a deep breath and lifted the receiver to my ear. "Hello," I said, my voice barely a whisper. There was a moment of silence before a faint whisper broke through, sending shivers coursing through my body. The voice was muffled, almost as if it were coming from underwater. It spoke my name, followed by a series of disjointed phrases that made my heart race. Words of fear, secrets, and despair filled the line, swirling around me like a storm. "Help me!" The plea was desperate, chilling. I looked around the booth, half expecting to see someone standing outside, but I was utterly alone. My grip tightened on the receiver as the voice continued, weaving a tale of shadows and lost souls trapped beneath the surface of the night. Suddenly, the line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear, confusion flooding my thoughts. Who had called me? And why did it feel like they were reaching out from the depths of despair? As I stepped back into the night, the eerie calm settled around me again. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just touched something ancient, something that had been buried in the darkness of Cedar Hollow. But what I didn't know was that this was only the beginning, and the echoes of the past were about to unravel a terrifying secret that had been waiting to resurface. The next few days were a blur of unease and paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over Cedar Hollow like a thick fog. Each time I passed the phone booth, I felt its presence tugging at my mind, a constant reminder of the chilling whispers that had invaded my thoughts. I tried to tell myself it was just a fluke, a trick of the wind, but deep down, I knew it was something more sinister. As the sun dipped below the horizon each night, the villagers seemed to grow more anxious. Conversations at the grocery store shifted from mundane chatter to hushed discussions about the phone booth and the voices. I overheard Mrs. Wilkins, the schoolteacher, recounting her own experience. She had answered the phone just the night before, claiming she heard someone sobbing on the other end, begging for help. "There's something wrong with that booth," she said, her voice trembling. I felt like it was trying to pull me in. That sentiment echoed in my own mind, and I couldn't help but feel that I was drawn to the booth again. I wanted to know who, or what, was calling, but I also feared what I might find. That night, I decided to return to the booth, despite the warnings echoing in my head. As I approached the old structure, the air around me felt charged, alive with a tension I couldn't explain. The night was still, and the stars above seemed to flicker ominously, as if they too were watching. I stepped into the booth, heart racing, and picked up the receiver once more. It rang. This time, I hesitated. Should I answer? What if it was just my imagination playing tricks on me again? But the curiosity gnawed at me, stronger than my fear. I took a deep breath and pressed the receiver to my ear. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling slightly. The line crackled before the same faint whispers returned, clearer this time. A chorus of voices, overlapping and frantic. "Help us! Help us!" They were desperate, pleading, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my brow. "Who are you?" I asked, my heart pounding. The whispers fell silent for a moment, and then a single voice broke through the noise. "We are lost, trapped beneath the ice." My blood ran cold. Ice? What did that mean? I felt a sickening twist in my stomach as memories flooded back. Stories of the lake nearby, of children who had fallen through the ice decades ago and were never found. The weight of their loss pressed down on me, the realization hitting me like a wave. "Where are you?" I demanded, my voice rising. There was a pause, and then the voice returned, softer now. "The lake. Come to the lake, before it's too late." The line went dead again, and I stood there, frozen, the receiver still pressed to my ear. The urgency in the voice echoed in my mind, a siren call that pulled me toward the dark, frozen lake I had always avoided. As I stumbled out of the booth, I glanced back at the empty street. I was alone, but I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in around me. I knew I couldn't ignore it. Whatever was happening, whatever those voices were trying to tell me, it was connected to the lake. Against my better judgment, I found myself walking toward the water's edge. The moonlight cast a ghostly glow over the frozen surface, and the air was eerily still. I could see my reflection in the ice, but behind it, something shifted, a shadow, a movement beneath the surface. "Help us!" the whispers echoed in my mind, and I felt an inexplicable urge to reach out, to touch the ice. I leaned closer, heart racing, searching for signs of life beneath the frozen facade. But the moment my fingers grazed the surface, a bone-chilling crack resonated through the air. I stumbled back, breathless, my heart pounding in my chest. I realized I was standing at the edge of something far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Something was beneath the ice, waiting, watching, and I was being drawn deeper into a mystery that was steeped in sorrow and loss. I could no longer ignore the dark truths hidden beneath Cedar Hollow, and as the shadows danced in the moonlight, I knew I was about to uncover a terrifying secret that had long been buried. The cold seeped into my bones as I stood there, the dark water beneath the ice taunting me with its secrets. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, to escape this place and the whispers that lingered in the air like a haunting melody. But I couldn't leave, not yet. I took a deep breath and turned back toward the phone booth, compelled by an invisible force. What had those voices meant? I couldn't help but think of the children from the stories, how their laughter once filled the air before tragedy struck. Could they be the ones calling for help? As I reached the booth, the receiver hung silently, waiting for me. My heart raced with uncertainty, but I knew I had to try again. I picked up the phone, its weight heavy in my hand, and held it to my ear. "Is anyone there?" I whispered, my voice barely breaking the stillness. Silence enveloped me, And just as I thought I'd be met with nothing, the crackling of the line broke through. "Help us!" It was the same voice, trembling with urgency. "Why are you under the ice? What happened to you?" I pleaded, desperation creeping into my tone. "Fell, playing, trapped." The voice sounded more frantic now, the words tumbling over each other. "You must find them before it's too late." I felt a shiver run down my spine. The weight of their words hung heavy in the air. I had to know the truth. What lay beneath that frozen surface? I couldn't just leave them there, lost and alone. Before I could think better of it, I took off toward the lake again, my feet crunching on the frost. The ice stretched before me, a vast, cold expanse that shimmered under the moonlight. I scanned the surface, searching for any signs of movement, anything that could point me toward the truth. As I reached the center of the lake, the whispers intensified, swirling around me like a storm. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on the sounds. "Help us, find us." Suddenly, I heard a soft crack beneath my feet. I froze, fear gripping me as I realized the ice was shifting. My heart raced, and I took a cautious step back, but the whispers grew louder, more desperate. "Please, help." Before I knew it, I was moving again, my feet almost acting of their own accord. I felt drawn to a specific spot on the ice, an area where the surface seemed different, a darker patch beneath the shimmering layer. It was almost as if the ice had a pulse, a heartbeat of its own. I knelt down, my breath fogging in the freezing air, and pressed my hands against the ice. "I'm here," I shouted. "I'm here to help you. Where are you?" The surface trembled, and I gasped as I caught a glimpse of something beneath the ice. A small hand, pale and outstretched, reaching for me. I stumbled back, terror coursing through my veins. "No, no," I screamed, heart pounding in my chest. I felt as if I was teetering on the edge of something dark and deep. I couldn't let fear consume me. I had to act. Frantically, I scanned the shoreline, my mind racing. I remembered the stories of the villagers trying to save those who had fallen through the ice. They always spoke of the importance of breaking through, of reaching those trapped beneath. Without thinking, I ran back to the cabin nearby, where I knew there were tools stored away for winter maintenance. I found an old ice auger, its metal gleaming ominously in the light. I took it and rushed back to the lake, adrenaline fueling my every move. Standing at the spot where I had seen the hand, I gripped the auger tightly, feeling the cold metal bite into my skin. I plunged it into the ice, twisting and turning, desperate to reach the secrets hidden beneath. With every rotation, the whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. I was afraid of what I might find, but I couldn't turn back now. I had to keep going. The ice cracked around the auger, and I felt a rush of hope as I realized I was making progress. Suddenly, the ice gave way with a loud crack, and I stumbled back, nearly losing my balance. My heart raced as I peered into the hole I had created. The water beneath was dark and murky, but I could make out shapes moving in the depths, shadows swirling as if they were alive. "Help us," came the voice again, echoing in the darkness. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to remain steady. I took a deep breath and shouted into the hole, "I'm coming! Hold on!" As I lowered myself down, the cold air clawed at my skin, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I was about to uncover a darkness that had remained hidden for far too long, and I could only hope that I was prepared for the truth that awaited me. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared down into the inky blackness. What awaited me beneath the ice? I couldn't turn back now. I had already ventured too far into this nightmare. With a deep breath, I gripped the edge of the hole, lowered myself further, and plunged into the frigid water. The cold engulfed me instantly, a shocking bite that stole my breath. My body tensed as I fought against the icy grip. Panic surged, but I pushed it down, forcing myself to focus. I had to find them, had to uncover what lay hidden beneath this cursed surface. As I submerged deeper, the darkness swallowed me whole. I strained my eyes, trying to see through the murky water. Shapes flickered in my periphery, but I couldn't make out what they were. All I could hear was the rush of my heartbeat and the echoes of whispered pleas. "Help us!" The voices surrounded me, pulling me deeper into the abyss. I swam, pushing against the cold resistance, my lungs screaming for air. Just as I felt my resolve waning, a faint glow broke through the darkness ahead of me. It beckoned me, a soft light shining like a distant star, illuminating the shapes that danced in the depths. I swam toward it, my body moving on instinct. As I drew closer, I could finally make out what lay beneath the ice. Figures, trapped and frozen, their faces contorted in fear and despair. My heart sank as I realized they were the children from the stories, their eyes wide with terror, silently pleading for salvation. "Please, don't leave us," one of them whispered, the words slicing through my heart like a knife. I reached out, fingers brushing against the surface of the ice, the chilling reality hitting me hard. I couldn't save them, not like this. I needed to get them out. With newfound determination, I kicked off from the bottom, propelling myself back to the surface, my mind racing with thoughts of rescue. Bursting through the ice, I gasped for air, pulling myself back onto the frozen surface. The wind bit at my skin, but I was fueled by desperation. I scrambled back to the hole I had created, my fingers shaking as I grasped the auger again. I could hear the whispers growing frantic, a chorus of haunting voices urging me on. "Hurry! Help us!" With each twist of the auger, the ice cracked further, shattering the silence that surrounded me. I could feel a sense of urgency rising within me. Time was slipping away, and the more I hesitated, the closer I felt to losing them forever. Finally, the ice gave way, and a larger hole formed beneath me. I knelt at the edge, peering down into the inky water once more. The glow from the depths flickered, but I could sense the children's presence, their essence calling to me. I pulled off my jacket, tossing it aside, and braced myself for what was next. With all the strength I could muster, I plunged back into the water, determination guiding my every move. I swam deeper, fueled by the desperate cries of the trapped children. As I neared the glowing light, I felt an overwhelming wave of cold wash over me, paralyzing my senses. My limbs ached, and I struggled to keep going, the water growing darker around me. But then, as I reached out, I felt a small hand grasp mine. "Help us, please." It was the same voice from before, now filled with fear and urgency. With that single touch, a surge of energy shot through me. I pulled with all my might, feeling the child's tiny body fighting against the water, desperate for escape. I couldn't let go. I wouldn't let go. I swam toward the surface, dragging the child with me, my lungs burning. We broke through the ice, gasping for breath, and I pulled the child up onto the solid surface. My heart raced as I looked around, searching for the other children, knowing I had to return. But before I could act, a cold grip wrapped around my ankle, dragging me back toward the depths. "Help!" I screamed, thrashing against the unseen force that pulled me down. I could feel the water closing in around me, the darkness beckoning, but I couldn't let it win. "Please, help them," the child beside me pleaded, their voice a haunting echo in my mind. "I won't leave you," I shouted back, determination rising in my chest. With every ounce of strength, I kicked and fought against the pull, my mind racing. I had to go back. I had to save them. But as I glanced down into the depths, the darkness grew thicker, more suffocating. "Help!" came the echoing whispers, drowning out my thoughts. I was losing the battle. As the icy grip continued to tighten, I felt myself slipping. I was caught in a nightmare, a reality far darker than I could have ever imagined. But the flicker of light from above urged me on. I had to escape, had to find a way to break this cycle of despair. With a final desperate kick, I broke free from the grasp, the icy water rushing past me as I propelled myself upward. I could see the surface getting closer, the faint glow of moonlight breaking through the ice. I gasped as I broke through once more, pulling myself onto the solid ground. But as I lay there, panting and shivering, I realized I had only saved one. The darkness still lurked beneath, whispering promises and secrets, and I knew that the fight was far from over. As I lay on the ice, gasping for breath, the weight of what I had just experienced pressed down on me. I looked at the child beside me, a small girl with wide, terrified eyes. She was shivering, her small frame trembling in the frigid air. "Where are the others?" I croaked, forcing myself to sit up. My heart raced as I glanced back at the hole in the ice. The whispers were louder now, echoing in my mind, a cacophony of voices begging for help. The girl's gaze shifted downward, and I could see the flicker of fear in her eyes. "They're still there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have to help them. They need you." I felt a surge of determination course through me. I couldn't leave them behind, not after everything I had witnessed. I stood up, my body aching and numb from the cold. The ice beneath my feet creaked ominously, but I steadied myself, focusing on the hole that led to the darkness below. I could hear the whispers now, each voice distinct and pleading, filling the night air with a sense of urgency. "Help us! We're trapped!" With each step I took toward the edge, the cold seemed to seep deeper into my bones. I crouched down, peering into the dark waters once again. The glow was faint but still present, and I could make out the shapes of the other children below. They were still there, waiting for someone to pull them out of their frozen prison. "Please, come back!" the voices cried out, desperation heavy in their tone. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself. "I'll get you out," I promised, though I wasn't sure how I would do it. The darkness loomed beneath the surface, ready to pull me back down into its depths. I grabbed a nearby branch, using it to poke at the ice around the hole, trying to make it larger. With each crack that echoed through the night, the voices grew more frantic, urging me on. "Hurry!" As the hole widened, I felt a sudden chill wrap around me, as if the very essence of the darkness was trying to claw its way back to me. I could see shadows moving beneath the surface, the children's faces peering up at me with a mixture of hope and fear. "Stay together!" I shouted down, my voice barely cutting through the whispers. "I'm coming for you!" With a final push, I tore away the last remnants of ice, creating a large enough opening. I knelt at the edge, heart racing, and dove into the icy water once more. The shock of the cold was almost unbearable, but I focused on the glow ahead, the faint light guiding me through the darkness. As I swam deeper, I felt a pull, not just from the water but from something else, something sinister lurking just beneath the surface. The shadows shifted around me, and I could hear the whispers intensifying, a chorus of pleading voices drowning out my thoughts. "Don't leave us," they cried. "Help us." I kicked harder, propelling myself toward the light, determined to reach the children. As I drew closer, I reached out to the first figure I saw, a boy with frightened eyes, his face pressed against the ice. "Grab my hand," I shouted, extending my arm toward him. He reached up, fingers trembling as they clasped around mine. With a surge of strength, I pulled him toward me, feeling the weight of his tiny body as I swam toward the surface. We broke through the ice together, gasping for air. But the darkness didn't let go easily. As I surfaced, I felt the grip of the shadows tightening around my legs, pulling me back down. The whispers turned to shrieks, filling my mind with chaos. "You can't escape. You belong to us." "No," I yelled, fighting against the pull. I couldn't give in. Not now. Not after coming this far. The boy clung to me, his eyes wide with fear. "Help them. We can't leave them." Panic surged within me, but I knew I had to fight. I took a deep breath and plunged back under, determination fueling my every movement. I swam to the next child, another girl whose face was etched with fear. "Take my hand," I urged, grabbing her wrist and pulling her toward the surface. The shadows roared in protest, clawing at me, but I couldn't stop now. I was their only chance. One by one, I pulled the children from the depths, each gasp for air filling my heart with hope. But as I surfaced for the last time, the darkness surged around us, threatening to drag us all back into the abyss. "We have to go," I shouted, pushing the children toward the edge of the ice. "Climb." "No." They scrambled onto the surface, their small hands grasping at the edges as I felt the shadows closing in. The whispers turned to angry roars, clawing at my sanity. "You can't leave. You belong to us." I gritted my teeth and turned to face the darkness, my heart racing. No, I refused to be a part of this. With a final surge of strength, I dove toward the edge, pulling myself and the last child onto the solid surface just as the darkness surged around us. The ice creaked beneath us, but we were safe, at least for now. I lay there, breathless and trembling, the cold biting at my skin. The children clustered around me, their eyes wide with terror but also relief. We had escaped, for now. But as I looked back at the hole, the whispers lingered in the air, a reminder of the darkness that lay beneath. I knew this was far from over. The call of the depths would always be there, waiting, watching. And as I turned to the children, I realized that while we had escaped the ice, the shadows would never truly let us go.
The Last Lamppost.
It was supposed to be a shortcut, just a quick drive on a nearly empty road to save me some time. I'd finished up a late-night meeting and was eager to get back home, my bed practically calling my name. I remember thinking that this road, this quiet, isolated stretch of blacktop, would make things quicker and easier. But now, as I stared out at the endless darkness, something felt off. I don't know exactly when I noticed it, but there, far ahead of me, was a streetlight. Just one. It wasn't unusual to see a light out in the middle of nowhere, but this one seemed different. The closer I got, the more it felt like it was watching me. Even with my headlights cutting through the dark, it stood out, glowing faintly like some kind of beacon. I shrugged it off at first, blaming it on the exhaustion that was settling over me. But as I kept driving, I noticed that the light didn't seem to be getting any closer. The road stretched on, but the streetlight just stayed there, exactly the same distance away. I drove faster, the sound of the engine drowning out the unsettling quiet, and I watched my gas gauge slowly tick down as the clock on my dashboard kept counting the minutes. Minutes turned to half an hour. Half an hour became a full hour, and yet, that damn light still hung there on the horizon, almost mocking me. What the hell? I muttered to myself, fingers tapping anxiously on the steering wheel. I'd gone miles by now, definitely enough to reach it, but it was like I was frozen in place. I'd seen enough horror movies to know when things felt wrong, and right then, every nerve in my body was on high alert. Still, I kept going. The whole situation didn't make sense, but I told myself that if I just kept driving, I'd eventually get somewhere. Somewhere where that light was behind me, and I was free of this empty road. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the weird, anxious feeling clinging to my chest. After what felt like an eternity, I could no longer ignore the creeping unease gnawing at me. My eyes were heavy, and the monotony of the road was driving me insane. I made a snap decision to pull over, hoping that a quick stretch would help clear my mind. I parked the car on the shoulder, the engine ticking as it cooled down, and stepped out into the chilling night air. The darkness enveloped me, and I instantly regretted my choice. The silence was profound, almost suffocating. I could only hear the faint crunch of gravel underfoot as I wandered away from my car, glancing back at it occasionally as if it were a lifeboat in a vast ocean. The streetlight still loomed ahead, unchanged, its glow flickering slightly like it was struggling against the night. I took a few tentative steps toward it, driven by a mix of curiosity and frustration. With each step, however, I felt an invisible weight pressing down on me, urging me to turn back. It was just a streetlight, I told myself. Just a light. But something in the back of my mind whispered that I was being watched. As I approached, I started to notice the odd details that I had overlooked before. The ground was covered in frost, and the air had an unnatural stillness to it. I could see my breath misting in front of me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was lurking in the shadows, something that didn't belong to this world. I took another step, and my heart began to race. Why was I feeling this way? I paused, listening intently for any sound that would justify my anxiety. Instead, I was met with a suffocating silence, the kind that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And then, just like that, I heard it, a faint whispering echoing from beneath the light, like a distant voice calling out for help. I froze, chills running down my spine. I could have sworn I heard someone pleading, begging for something. Was I really hearing voices, or was my mind playing tricks on me? The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it, to turn around and get back to my car, but curiosity and fear kept me rooted to the spot. I took a shaky breath, convincing myself to step closer, to look down into the shadows where the light didn't reach. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe there was nothing to fear. But as I moved, it felt like the ground shifted beneath me, pulling me back toward my car, toward safety. And yet, I was drawn closer to that damned light, unable to turn away. The whispers grew louder, weaving through the air like an eerie melody that pulled at my insides. I took a hesitant step forward, my heart pounding in my chest as I fought against the instinct to flee back to the car. What was happening? I had to know. As I stepped closer to the streetlight, the shadows deepened around me. The frost crunched beneath my feet, and the world felt like it was closing in. I peered down, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was beneath the light, but all I saw were dark shapes twisting in the periphery of my vision. I squinted, straining to hear the voices, but the moment I focused, they faded into silence, leaving only the echo of my own breath. Suddenly, A sense of dread washed over me. I turned abruptly and sprinted back to my car, hoping to escape whatever was lurking in the darkness. I flung myself into the driver's seat, heart racing, and slammed the door shut. I tried to catch my breath as I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. I started the engine, the familiar roar providing a fleeting sense of safety. I drove away, but the relief was short-lived. As I looked in the rearview mirror, that damned streetlight was still there, glowing brighter than before, like a beacon calling me back. Panic surged through me. How had I not gotten away? I pressed down on the accelerator, and the engine roared to life, but the road stretched endlessly ahead. The minutes ticked by, but the landscape never changed. The streetlight remained in the distance, and no matter how fast I drove, it felt like I was going in circles. I gripped the wheel tighter, sweat forming on my brow. I told myself I just needed to keep driving, that it would disappear once I was far enough away, but it didn't. It was like I was trapped in a twisted game, each turn leading me right back to that unsettling glow. Frustration bubbled within me as I slammed on the brakes and parked on the side of the road again. I couldn't keep this up. I needed to figure out what was happening. With dread settling in my gut, I stepped out of the car once more, my mind racing with the fear of the unknown. This time, I resolved to march straight toward the light. Maybe if I confronted it, it would lose its power over me. As I walked, I could feel the atmosphere shifting around me, the air thickening with an oppressive silence. But as I reached the point where I had turned back before, I froze. I was back at my car again, only this time I was even closer to the streetlight. I glanced down and gasped at the sight. There were marks in the frost leading right to my feet, deep, irregular impressions that looked like desperate scrapes. My heart raced as I realized that no matter what I did, I was being pulled closer to that light, and something beneath it was waiting for me. The voices returned, this time clearer and more insistent, echoing through the stillness. They weren't just whispers, they sounded like cries for help. My blood ran cold, and I stumbled backward, terrified. What had I gotten myself into? The ground beneath me felt unstable, and the world around me twisted in ways I couldn't comprehend. I took a step back, trying to shake off the dread creeping up my spine, but my feet seemed to be rooted to the spot. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape this cycle. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just lost. I was ensnared in something much darker than I could have imagined. The whispers grew louder, weaving through the air like an eerie melody that pulled at my insides. I took a hesitant step forward, my heart pounding in my chest as I fought against the instinct to flee back to the car. What was happening? I had to know. As I stepped closer to the streetlight, the shadows deepened around me. The frost crunched beneath my feet, and the world felt like it was closing in. I peered down, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was beneath the light, but all I saw were dark shapes twisting in the periphery of my vision. I squinted, straining to hear the voices, but the moment I focused, they faded into silence, leaving only the echo of my own breath. Suddenly, a sense of dread washed over me. I turned abruptly and sprinted back to my car, hoping to escape whatever was lurking in the darkness. I flung myself into the driver's seat, heart racing, and slammed the door shut. I tried to catch my breath as I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. I started the engine, the familiar roar providing a fleeting sense of safety. I drove away, but the relief was short-lived. As I looked in the rearview mirror, that damned streetlight was still there, glowing brighter than before, like a beacon calling me back. Panic surged through me. How had I not gotten away? I pressed down on the accelerator, and the engine roared to life, but the road stretched endlessly ahead. The minutes ticked by, but the landscape never changed. The streetlight remained in the distance, and no matter how fast I drove, it felt like I was going in circles. I gripped the wheel tighter, sweat forming on my brow. I told myself I just needed to keep driving, that it would disappear once I was far enough away, but it didn't. It was like I was trapped in a twisted game, each turn leading me right back to that unsettling glow. Frustration bubbled within me as I slammed on the brakes and parked on the side of the road again. I couldn't keep this up. I needed to figure out what was happening. With dread settling in my gut, I stepped out of the car once more, my mind racing with the fear of the unknown. This time, I resolved to march straight toward the light. Maybe if I confronted it, it would lose its power over me. As I walked, I could feel the atmosphere shifting around me, the air thickening with an oppressive silence. But as I reached the point where I had turned back before, I froze. I was back at my car again, only this time I was even closer to the streetlight. I glanced down and gasped at the sight. There were marks in the frost leading right to my feet, deep, irregular impressions that looked like desperate scrapes. My heart raced as I realized that no matter what I did, I was being pulled closer to that light, and something beneath it was waiting for me. The voices returned, this time clearer and more insistent, echoing through the stillness. They weren't just whispers, they sounded like cries for help. My blood ran cold, and I stumbled backward, terrified. What had I gotten myself into? The ground beneath me felt unstable, and the world around me twisted in ways I couldn't comprehend. I took a step back, trying to shake off the dread creeping up my spine, but my feet seemed to be rooted to the spot. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape this cycle. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just lost. I was ensnared in something much darker than I could have imagined. I drove faster than I ever had in my life, the engine roaring like a beast desperate to escape the nightmare that clung to my mind. The road stretched before me, and I tried to focus on the dim glow of distant headlights, a reassuring reminder that I was still in the realm of the living. But no matter how far I pushed the accelerator, the chilling whispers and haunting faces of the trapped souls lingered in my mind, clinging to the edges of my consciousness like a shadow that refused to dissipate. As I approached the edge of town, the familiarity of my surroundings brought a fleeting sense of comfort. I parked the car in front of my house, my hands trembling as I turned off the engine. The silence enveloped me, and for a moment I thought I could leave the horrors of the night behind. I took a deep breath, the chill of the air settling in my bones, and stepped out of the car. But as I walked to my front door, I felt a nagging sensation, a weight in my chest that told me something was still wrong. I hesitated, glancing back toward the road, half expecting to see the streetlight flickering in the distance, mocking me for my escape. That's when I heard it, a faint, mournful cry echoing through the stillness. I froze, my heart racing as the realization hit me. They hadn't truly left me. The voices of the trapped souls were still there, whispering through the fabric of the night, seeking solace and release. My stomach turned at the thought that I might be haunted forever by their pleas. I rushed inside, locking the door behind me as if that could shut out the memories of what I had witnessed. I flicked on the lights, and the warm glow provided a false sense of safety, but deep down, I knew I couldn't escape the truth of what I had seen. Those souls were forever tied to that cursed light, and their fate could easily become my own if I wasn't careful. Days turned into weeks, and life resumed its normal pace in my small town, but I couldn't shake the shadows of that night. I avoided the roads I used to drive, my heart pounding at the mere thought of encountering that streetlight again. The cries for help haunted my dreams, filling my nights with dread. I became a prisoner in my own home, too afraid to venture out alone after dark. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, I decided to confront my fears. I needed closure, a way to free myself from the grip of that nightmarish experience. I drove back toward the area where I had seen the streetlight, my pulse racing with every mile. I parked the car a safe distance away and approached the spot on foot, the icy wind biting at my skin. As I stood there, staring at the empty road, the darkness seemed to stretch endlessly before me. I could feel the presence of the souls still lurking beneath the surface, their cries echoing in my mind. I closed my eyes, trying to connect with the energy of the place, hoping to somehow reach out to them. "I'm sorry," I whispered into the night, my voice trembling. "I couldn't help you then, but I can't ignore you now. I'll remember you. I'll tell your story." For a moment, there was silence. Then, like a wave crashing over me, I felt a rush of cold air, and the whispers intensified. They were no longer cries of despair, but words of gratitude, intertwining with the wind, echoing around me. As I turned to leave, I felt lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. I knew I could never truly forget what I had seen, but perhaps by sharing their stories, I could give them a voice, a chance at peace. Back in my car, I looked up at the dark sky, feeling a sense of resolve. I wouldn't let fear control me any longer. I would tell the story of the last streetlight, of the souls trapped beneath its glow. I would ensure they would be remembered, even if I could never truly escape the echoes of despair. And as I drove away, the haunting cries faded into the distance, replaced by a sense of purpose. I would honor their memory, and in doing so, I would find my own freedom.